Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. My name is Al Williams. I'm president of the board of directors of the San Francisco African American Historical and Cultural Society. We're really delighted to be with you this evening for this special program. This is the Jonestown Remembrance on the 46th anniversary of the massacre in Jonestown. It was on November 18th, and we want to have this remembrance so that everyone is aware of what happened then, the circumstances related to it, and where we are today, how it is. The program will feature a presentation, as you probably know from the announcements that went out by Yulanda Williams, who was at Jonestown and left there, who will talk about her experiences. The society has been around since 1955, was founded in 1955, and we like to think we're a lineal descendant of an organization that was started back in the 1750s. And that Athenaeum, the San Francisco Athenaeum and Literary Society, whose mission, like ours, was to document, preserve, present, and share information about the experience of African American people of African descent in the city and county of San Francisco. Without belaboring that, I'd like to welcome and introduce John Templeton, a historian who has been a very important piece of bringing this program together, helping us to bring this program together. So, John, if you'd like to come forward and introduce yourself and say a few words.
Thank you, Al. This is my 30th year as the historian in residence at the African American Art and Culture Complex. And the most recent assignment I got from upstairs was something called Mapping Maya, where we looked at the 7 autobiographies that Maya Angelou did. And mapped all the places that she mentioned. And so one of the things that we uncovered was a series of 10 documentaries that she did for KQED in 1968 that were a visual record of what this community was like. And there's nothing like it in terms of the breadth and depth of it. And so a big part of the picture that we got of this community was the creative community, arts and culture. So as you see, we're in the Black Creativity exhibition that just started a couple weeks ago, and we encourage folks to come back and see all of the art here and tell other folks. But it includes a couple of periods. So the New Negro period began in the early 1900s. And the leading artists of the New Negro period was someone named Sergeant Claude Johnson. And so the society is the largest holder of his works. And so we have some of his works that are here. And so that's the New Negro period that was very prominent here. But by the 60s, we had what's called the Black Arts Movement. And it was kind of centered in this neighborhood. And we had the Black House. Remember the Black House? Right? And so Danny Glover and Ed Bullins and folks like that lived in the Black House. And so the Black Arts Movement basically continues to this day. And it sort of fulfilled what Sergeant Johnson said that you'll see on the wall, where he said he was creating a Negro art so that Black people could see themselves as beautiful. And so this is what he said in 1935, and it wasn't until 65 that it actually became in vogue. So this was a place where artists and musicians could express themselves and do things that were unimaginable to folks, those of us who live elsewhere. And so, as I remember back in the 1960s, growing up in North Carolina, you know, we looked to San Francisco as sort of the ultimate in Black expression. So most of us, talk about reading Eldridge Cleaver's Soul on Ice in high school and listening to Sly and the Family Stone, doing music that was unlike anything we had ever heard before. And so if you wanted to demoralize the entire Black community across the country in one fell swoop, you would do something catastrophic to this neighborhood. And so we saw things like urban renewal, which we've gotten a lot of attention to. But in 1978, two things happened. And I was in grad school in Black Studies at University of North Carolina. And Dr. Goodlett was chair of my thesis committee. And I just remember how deflated he was after this event. And this was somebody that we thought was Superman. He had radio stations and newspapers and traveled the world and all that sort of thing. But he felt really deflated, and it was something that was shared across the Black community. It was like a door was closing on the progress of the 1960s. So we want to kind of ask a question, and I've been monitoring the news all day, and ask why the largest mass casualty event prior to 9/11 is not recognized officially anywhere in the city of county of San Francisco. So that same weekend, there was the assassination of the mayor. And so there are billions of dollars that have been spent on memorials to Harvey Milk and to George Moscone. But somehow the 900 people who perished in Guyana don't merit a mention, right? And so we're blessed today to have an eyewitness to the People's Temple experience and to Jonestown, but she's more than an eyewitness. She's also a pioneer as an African-American woman who rose to the rank of captain in the San Francisco Police Department. And so that also allows her to look at this crime of the century as a law enforcement professional. And part of what we'll, explore with her is what questions would she ask now as a trained investigator, about what happened and what are some of the conclusions that she would draw from what she remembers. But there's more. She is also a creative person in her own right. And she has written 2 songs about November 18th. And so as we bring forward the President Emeritus of Officers for Justice and the new Vice President of the San Francisco NAACP, we first want to ask her to perform one of her songs.
This song that is going to be performed is a song that was written to memorialize the fact that no matter what you do to try and tear me down, still I'll rise. And it's called Still I Rise. Like a phoenix rises from the ashes in the fierce blazing fire, magically. The pain and the trauma, I stand tall. The face of darkness, I'll find my way. To every shadow fall. The face of the trouble, still I rise. In the shadows of my past, where the heartache lies, I walk through the fire, felt the weight of the sky. Every tear that I share, every song that I bear, is a sentimental space, showing how much I care. Through the pain and the trauma, I stand tall. In the face of darkness, I'll find my way. With every waterfall, I found out mine. Still I'll rise. Racism's heavy hand tried to pull me down. You embrace all the love I've grown stronger inside. The face of justice, I won't run or hey, the trauma. The face of darkness, my way. With them, life, the feel I will remember. When there's trouble, there's one thing you have control over. You still can rise. And I think that this song also speaks to the heart of our people, of our Black Americans. Through everything that we have encountered, we still continue to rise. Thank you. Oh, okay. All righty.
the situation, but the question, yeah, given your experience, what yes, it works better when you turn it on. So I asked the question a third time. So just tell us a little bit about how you became involved in People's Temple. What was the experience? What attracted you, and did you find what you were looking for? And just tell us a little bit about your experience in that regard on the front end.
That's a very good and fair question. And I would pose it this way as to what was the lure or the draw for me as a child. Again, you have to remember at that time I was still in what is now called middle school. We used to call junior high school. And I was a student at Everett Middle School. And so that would put me at about 11 or 11 and a half years of age. And my parents were involved very deeply in the church and religion, and family structure and order was very important to us. And of course, during that time, drugs were starting to enter into our communities, and families were starting to be torn apart. At that time, my dad, who was a Baptist minister here in San Francisco, had experienced a heart attack, and he was told that he would never, ever work again. So for me as a young person, I was concerned as to what my future would look like if my dad could no longer work, because my mother, fortunately, was able to be a stay-at-home mom. So that was a traumatic time for me. But my dad had run into one of his clergy friends, Reverend Dave Garrison, who unfortunately is no longer with us either. And Dave had told him of a man he had met in Ukiah, California, Jim Jones. And this man was supposedly a prophet, and he was able to heal people of ailments. And so he had suggested to my dad that he should go one Sunday, follow them up to People's Temple in Redwood Valley, California, to meet Jim Jones, because he thought Jim Jones might be able to help him keep his family together and keep his life in order. So, searching for a solution, my parents went to People's Temple. And I recall they had left at around 6:30 in the morning, and on a Sunday morning. And normally every Sunday morning, I had to get ready to go to Sunday school and church. But that particular Sunday, they told me I was going to be able to stay at home. Well, for me, that was an absolute treat. I get to stay at home and the parents are gone. Cartoon day, I'm going to have fun. And so my parents took that trip up there. When they came back, they told me, "You'll never believe what we saw." I said, "What?" "There are so many young people up there. There's this man, Jim Jones. They have a ranch. They have horses. They have grape vineyards. They have all type of farm animals. They have a pool inside of the church. And there's young people from all races there. And the church was packed. And this man spoke of the drugs that were infesting the city. He spoke of the issues with criminal justice system. He spoke about things that were of value and meaningful to those who were still trying to make it in life. As a young person, when I heard that, because I was at home with my parents all the time. I didn't have any siblings that were close enough in age for me to be able to play with. So excitement was what I was thinking. Oh, wow, some young people my age. And so I told them, I want to get back there. I want to go. I want to see this. And I kept pestering and pestering them for about 2 or 3 weeks. And then finally they brought me. And when they brought me there, just like they said, for me, a young girl from the city, it was magical. I saw and I was introduced to things that I had never experienced in Concrete City, San Francisco. And the young people were so loving and kind to me. They wanted me to go on a vacation with them. And I said, well, I don't have any clothes or anything. Oh, we'll give you some clothes. You can just come with us. I begged and pleaded with my parents to let me go, but of course they didn't because they had not prepared for it. However, what lured me to it was the fact that there were young people there. What lured me to it was the fact that he had a drug rehabilitation program for young people who were hopefully addicted to drugs. What lured me to it is the fact that he had a choir that was full of young people and old people. And then what also intrigued me even more was that nobody was dressed in suits and ties and all of that stuff. They were just down home folks. And they were just pleasant people who at the time presented themselves as people who wanted to do right in society and people who wanted to end the racism, the sexism, and all the isms that unfortunately divide us. So he became someone that I looked to as a unifier. He became, for me, the next voice. I thought a voice that was just as powerful and just as strong as Martin Luther King, because he spoke highly of Martin Luther King. He spoke highly of Angela Davis, Malcolm X, all of the people that we knew about, but historically, he provided all of that information and that knowledge. And as a young person, I just wanted to hear more. Yes, he spoke about religion and our duties as Christians, but he made it more simplified in a way that as a young person, I could relate. And so that is what made me want to keep coming back. And of course, eventually, he claimed to have healed my father of the heart attack, and my dad did subsequently go back to work. So, because that happened, and I truly believed that he had healed my dad, I made a vow that I owed this man my life and I was going to be committed to what it was that he was doing. So ultimately, it's that thing that happens to you when you join a gang. It's that thing that happens to you when sometimes you're a victim of domestic violence. You can't get away. You just keep going back to it because that's what you know. And, you know, your expectations, you know what to expect. Um, and that's how and why I stayed was because I felt that there was a debt that needed to be paid. And so I was going to have to pay that debt. So it instilled a certain level of commitment and loyalty that is not normal in hindsight.
Because for San Francisco. So can you describe how the People's Temple came to San Francisco and how they were received?
Well, the reason that People's Temple relocated from Redwood Valley to San Francisco was because there were a mass number of people coming from San Francisco and driving to Redwood Valley on Wednesday nights, Sundays, and we would be there until late, late Sunday nights. And because of the fact that it was becoming draining and it was 2.5 hours from the city, they started to look for a new place to have services that would have been more uh, easier to access for those who were coming from the city, the Bay Area. Because, you know, down in Mendocino County, there weren't many jobs and there wasn't a lot of high paying jobs. So it made financial sense for them to move to San Francisco so that they could continue to increase the membership of People's Temple and at the same time be able to expand programs that they had already established in Redwood Valley, because they also had a legal team, and the legal team provided free legal services for any of the members' family and sometimes even friends that were brought to the attention of Jim Jones and People's Temple, and then he would put the legal team on it. And oftentimes people would basically be freed or be placed on probation and told that they just need to stay around People's Temple in order to straighten up their lives and redirect whatever challenges that they were going through. And so this was another level of services and resources that People's Temple was able to provide to those who could not afford it.
Then once you were in San Francisco, just from what I recall reading and seeing, People's Temple became pretty powerful in San Francisco, and local politics became very influential in in uh, in local politics. And I believe he was on the housing authority, became on the housing authority, and had influence there. How did that part of it come about? Was it a result of the size of the population of People's Temple and that influence? How did that influence grow, and did it work to the advantage of members of the temple, or how did that go?
Well, Jim Jones, again, was a very charismatic leader.
Mhm.
When he knew his audience in advance, and he knew what the audience wanted to hear or needed to hear. So he made certain that his messages were on point. And the way he was able to lure and manipulate the political world was based on the fact that he had thousands of members. The members, we worked 24/7, 366 days. Even if it was 365, you felt like it was 366 every year, because there was nothing that he would ask us to do that we were not willing to do. That's the level of the loyalty and the dedication that was in People's Temple. Massive flyers going out, promises to politicians that we could get them in office. He had people like then Chief Gaines of the San Francisco Police Department was one of his very good friends. He could pick up the phone and call him and tell him what he needed, what needed to happen, and it would happen. He had contacts and strong relationships with Dianne Feinstein. Many of the local politicians, even politicians on the state level and beyond. And it was all because of the fact that he represented a major voting bloc. In fact, Rosalind Carter, when Jimmy Carter was running for president, they depended on People's Temple to bring those voters in. They depended on People's Temple to get out there and walk the streets, to get the mailers out. And we delivered everything that he said we were going to do. We did that and beyond. And so for that reason, there were many political figures that owed a debt of gratitude and a debt of grace beyond what should have been given to him. And that is unfortunately why he was able to do all of these things that should not have occurred. Because as I was doing some research, I found this, and I found this to be extremely interesting, that typically cults emerge by addressing the fundamental needs and responding to the social and economic injustices that one faces. Those who benefit from this support often develop a profound sense of loyalty and commitment to the individuals and the leader who has provided it to them. And ultimately, I think that's what happened to the majority of the members of People's Temple. Because as Black people, we're spiritual people. As Black people, we're forgiving. And as Black people, we will give grace, sometimes beyond what someone would think is humanly possible. But we were a targeted group of people. And I do sincerely believe that is the case, that we were targeted and there was a reason for that. And that is where I get into my thoughts, which have been for the last almost 50 years, that this was a government experiment. This was not Jim Jones working on his own. There is no way that one individual could do all of this and go unscathed. This was a mass murder, genocidal in nature, and again, an experimental extermination of Black people. And they wanted to see how those who were still here were going to react to what had happened over there. And you know what? We didn't do enough over here. We didn't do enough over here. And that's why, when you said earlier, we don't really recognize this day in San Francisco. But this is a tragic situation that impacted San Francisco. Well, the reason we don't is because as a Black group of people, you don't have to just live in San Francisco to say, I want to see San Francisco make November 18th a day of permanent remembrance. Get some people from Oakland, get some from Richmond, get all the Black folks together and demand that we are respected every November 18th when this day goes by with no one saying anything. I just left the meeting with the mayor. I reminded him that it's November 18th. This is the day of the massacre of Jonestown. Oh, how can you be the mayor of a metropolitan city like San Francisco and not remember November 18th? Most of those 900 people go. Oh, but that's right. The majority wore Black. Experimental plan 1978. That's what I call Jonestown. Experimental plan 1978.
What point were people asked to People's Temple?
I would say the ask of communal living, turning over your property, became a request. Almost say requirement if you were truly a lawyer. Heard, I would say around the rational, we can create our own societies in justice, and we can live in harmony as a new utopian society. And in doing so, if we pool all of our money together, there's benefits for each and every one of us, because no one has to act like a capitalist. No one has to worry about what they don't have today or tomorrow, because we're all going to eat. If one person eats, everybody eats. If one person doesn't sleep, nobody else sleeps. But we're going to function as one body, one source. And he made this sound so convincing and so appealing that many people believed it, and they started to not only live communal and turn in the majority of their income, but they also started to cash in insurance policies. They started to sign over their homes to People's Temple and other resources that they had, including stocks and bonds and everything else.
Well, given that, I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm sorry I want to let you tell us the story
Okay.
as fully as you'd like to, and then we'll go to questions
Okay.
from the rest of the audience.
All right.
That the way the setup of the intentions sounded really good and really beneficial, and it sounds like a great story, like it would work. What went wrong? Where did it go south? What how was that not realized? Because it seemed like everybody contributed, did what we were asked to do. All the members was doing what they were asked to do, but somewhere it took another turn. So I just wonder what your take on that was, and as a part of how did you, at what point did you and your family disengage, or were you in the become disillusioned with the process? And anything else you would like to add, and then we'll turn it over to members of the audience to raise questions as well.
Well, I would say that first and foremost, what went wrong was power, control, and corruption. There was too much power given to one individual. We lost our identity. We began to think like he wanted us to think. We asked him if we could do something where normal adults don't ask permission to do something. They do what they're going to do. Many parents lost control of their children because he became the father figure for everyone. So, in doing so, he's the father figure. He is the disciplinary person. He is the one with the strong arm and the strong hand. And what, in essence, happened is because of such control that he had internally inside of the church, not to mention the external control he had amongst politicians throughout San Francisco, the state of California, and even all the way up into the United States, our government turned a blind eye on criminal misconduct, which included child abuse, beatings, corporal punishment, and illegal transportation of children across the state lines without permission of the counties that they were supposed to be living in, and people being transported against their will, which is what we now know as human trafficking. And meanwhile, it became natural to those of us who were there. And it became so natural that people started to liquidate their assets. He had told you that if you were a true member and a follower of his, you will follow him without question. And your family who are not members of the church, they're considered outsiders. So what are you to do with outsiders? You stay away from them. You isolate yourself from your extended family members because they are lost. And he also instilled in us the fear that if you don't continue with me, what's going to really happen is that the government is going to come in here just like they did in Nazi Germany, and they're going to round up all the black people. They're going to start with those who live in the public housing projects. They're going to put fences around there, and the next thing you know, you're all going to be corralled together, and this world is coming to an end, and I am your last hope of survival. So I think many people also continue to follow him because they truly believe that that was the way and the answer to survival.
So, as a police officer, knowing what you know after decades in law enforcement, if you had been with SFPD in 1973, 1974, what would you have seen as a law enforcement officer that you didn't see being on the inside?
I think I had turned a blind eye to the child abuse and the beatings. As a law enforcement officer, I now realize that that was the most horrific thing that I could have done, to just sit there in silence or sit there and cheer on the violence that was being put out there publicly on display for us. And it was an unfortunate thing, but we used to have what was called catharsis. And catharsis was on Wednesday nights. So on Wednesday nights, I couldn't wait to go to catharsis because I wanted to see who was going to get in trouble, who was going to get boxed, and who was going to win. Now that's craziness. But that's the way I was raised at that time. But thankful to God, I remembered and recognized my spiritual upbringings as a young child. And that is truly what I believe saved me from destruction, the destruction that occurred with all of the other folks in what was called White Night. Now, interesting enough, and I just recently discovered this, but in October 1938, in Nazi Germany, when they first took the group of Jews, Adolf Hitler called that Crystal Night. Crystal Night. Jim Jones called his White Night. Jim Jones was in awe and adored the power and authority that Adolf Hitler had, Joseph Stalin, Vladimir Lenin. These were some of the people that he adored and he read incessantly about, including Edgar Cayce. Edgar Cayce was about mind control and brainwashing. So, needless to say, I believe initially Jim Jones was a paid puppet by the CIA. He always told us to look out for the CIA. The CIA's watching, the CIA's listening, the CIA. I mean, he had us so paranoid. It was us versus them. And the them was whoever he said was the them. We didn't know who them were, but if he said that's them, then okay, that's the enemy. We got to protect ourselves from them. We got to do whatever we need to do to protect ourselves. I think Jim Jones became overzealous. He became uncontrollable and problematic to them. And then he started using drugs. I didn't know he was using drugs when we were here in the United States. But interestingly enough, my oldest sister called him out on it about, I'd say, 4 years before we wound up going to Jonestown. One day he had a service, and it was the healing part of the ministry. And he had helped my sister get out of some criminal situation. My sister's daughter's back there. She looks just like my sister. I love her dearly. That's her. But she walked in the church, and I said, "Oh my God, I'm so glad to see Angela came to church today." And when she walked in there, she just looked at him. He said, "We're in the healing service. I want you to all close your eyes." She refused to close her eyes. And he said, "Did you not hear me tell you to close your eyes?" She looked up at him and she said, "I'm not closing my eyes. I want to see what you're doing." He always wore sunglasses, for those of you who recall. He pulled down his sunglasses and he looked at her and he said, "Young lady, You don't want me to look at you too hard with these eyes, because I'll turn you to a pillar of salt. She looked at him and she said, I'm not scared of you. You ain't nothing but a dope fiend. And I said, oh my God, she said that to Jim Jones. Oh God, you're going to get in so much trouble. The security officers whom he had that were church members ran up to her and told her that it was probably best that she leave. And she didn't leave without a fight. She continued to fight. And she told us, look at his eyes. The reason he wears sunglasses is because he don't want you to see. He's high off of heroin right now. You ain't nothing but a big heroin addict. And I was like, oh my God, this girl's going to get us killed or she's going to get killed. But you know what? She was right. But because we were so in the moment, we didn't even recognize that she had actually saw something that she was very familiar with, because she had been out there, so she knew what it looked like. And had we listened to her right then at that moment, that could have been the moment that our lives changed and we transitioned and we didn't have to go through all of this stuff. But I do believe everything I've gone through is for a purpose. Just like in his plan, those of you who have seen the pictures of the bodies that lay out there, over on the pavilion it says, those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it. We thought that was an original statement from him. It wasn't. Again, Hitler. A reminder not to forget the past. And Jim Jones sought reverence, power, loyalty, and ultimate control by any means necessary. Anybody who got in the way of that, he considered an arch enemy. Dr. Brown was one of the very few Black ministers that stood up against him and vocally expressed his displeasure with his conduct, his mannerisms, and questioned why he was present in San Francisco. So he claimed, I guess you could say, he was trying to make America great. Yeah, or he was trying to make San Francisco great. But he didn't. And I had to recognize to forgive does not mean I have to forget. And unfortunately, spiritually, we often make forgiveness and forgetting synonymous to one another, but they don't have to be. And in this instance, I will never let that be, because I will never claim Jim Jones as being one of the 900 victims, because how can you be a victim of yourself? He's the reason why all this happened. And the reason it also happened was not only because of his drug obsession, but because he wanted to keep control of a child who, to this day, we still don't know who's the real father of this child who's no longer in existence, but it was a child that he determined was going to be his child. So again, 900 lives lost for drugs, 900 lives lost for power, 900 lives lost because of a child custody battle that never should have existed. 900 people told that this was a test of their loyalty. 900 people, many of whom probably just thought it was just a joke again because he had done these white knight experiments with them in the past to see who would stay and remain in the room and who would get scared and act like a coward. And if you ran, he would call you a coward, and everybody else in the church would be calling you a coward at the same time. So I will never, ever in my life believe that 900 Americans just willingly said, yes, give me the poison, I'll take it. I don't want to come back to the United States. No way. And I will never believe that 900 people said, we're willing to all die right now because you said to. Because there was one who questioned it and they yelled and screamed and talked her down. But the one thing I do believe is that number 900 is significant. 300 that were brainwashed through his speeches and his constant voice being heard on the loudspeaker. Because when we were there, you heard him on the loudspeaker 24/7. You could not get away from his voice. He was in complete control. You could not read any newspapers or magazines, only approved documents that he said were acceptable to read. And that was generally about how to be a good comrade, and how to be a good socialist, and how to be a loyal person to your leader. So 300 that were brainwashed because they kept having to hear his voice. And on command, you do what he says do. At 5 o'clock in the morning, you are awakened by the loud horn. And you get up immediately and get to your workforces and get ready for breakfast and get out there and do your work for the day. And you stay out there till it's dark and you're back in the pavilion for a service, a night service with him. So 300 that are brainwashed through his speeches. I think 300 were probably drugged through the food because you don't cook your own food. You don't grow your own personal little meals or food or anything. Everything is done communally together. And there's only certain people who are approved to make the meals, and they make your plates for you. So that's the other controlled environment. And then there's a 300 that nothing happens to because we got to see what a person would act like normally. Well, you know what I'm thinking after all this time? I was one of the 300 that didn't get drugged. I wonder why. Probably because I didn't do the one thing, and my family, none of my family members did the one thing he required, which was for us to break all ties with outside family members. We still maintained the family unit. And he asked me the day that we were leaving, how is it that you are not like the rest of them? How is it that you have decided that you don't want to stay here? How were you able to stay connected to your family? And I said, because I know a man that's greater than you. And my family will always and has always been my family. And that was really the difference between me and many of the other members because he had broken their ties with their families. All letters that came into Jonestown were read before they were given to the recipient, and things were blacked out. Anything that was going out, correspondence going out, had to be read by the committee before it went out. My brother wound up showing me letters that I supposedly wrote and that my mother supposedly wrote. Both my mother and I, when we were with him, had said, we didn't write that. Oh, you know what that is. But that's how sneaky they were. That's how deliberate they were. And that's how comfortable they felt in doing what they were doing. And somebody doesn't feel that comfortable unless they know that they're being protected by somebody that's pretty high up in authority.
Well, what I just want to say, I commend you. You're a person that I know historically in the Western Addition. So I want to talk about the Fillmore because that's where it all happened at.
Yes.
And I also want to thank you for having somewhat of an interview on my tour. We did it right in front of the building, formerly 1839 Theater, but it was right there where the government had the post office. And I want to thank you very much for that.
No
We
problem.
did footage on that cameras. We was all there. The black media was there. Us four of us was there. I want to thank you for that. But I have questions I want to ask you. But before that, I was down at City Hall today with public comment, and I brought up this issue. That's what I spoke about. And I had this picture down there, Jim Jones, and I even mentioned. I said, "This mayor, he haven't even mentioned that." So you were there talking to him, so I know when he see that public comment, when I said, he said, "Oh," so I'm sure he did.
Mhm.
So. I remember my mom in the years when I was younger, she said, "Don't you go down on Fillmore Street on Gary. I don't want to see you down there." And I said, "Damn, I said I wanted to go down there and find out what was going on because everybody was talking about it. But I thank God my mother was a praying woman,
Yes,
and I
Lord.
listened to her. We didn't go down there. We went
Yes,
to
you did.
I'm a holy roller, what they call Pentecostal, and I thank God.
Yeah.
So anyway, I want to say that I appreciate you. You're a historical woman, and I know that you're gonna write your books, and I plan to help whatever or would like to be part of that. I am the Fillmore Corridor Ambassador, and I want to thank you very much for that. So I'll talk later. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So let's see if there are any other questions or comments. Yes.
Comment. Dave Marijuana.
Hold on,
Dave?
Vermont, hold on a second. We will hear first and I'll come to you.
I do have I have a question and a comment. So, my question is, a warning for today. Looking at the social conditions we see now, displacement, poverty, isolation, what signs should communities watch for that vulnerable people are not taken advantage of again? And I just wanted to say that my husband lost 13 family members in Jonestown. They were in the Bayview. They did lose property. And this was, it was centered here in the Fillmore, but it went all across San Francisco. But we want to know, like, considering today what people are going through, the desperation, the cutting of the food programs, housing programs, and things like that. It seems like people are being primed for this type of action again.
Well, first of all, the things that people need to know and the lessons that we can take from this, the most important thing is that power unchecked is dangerous in any community, in any society. And when people's basic needs are threatened, such as security, a sense of belonging, economic stability, if all those things are gone or unmet, they become susceptible to manipulation from people, charismatic leaders like Jim Jones, trumpets, all kinds of things. We have to be vigilant and we have to hold people accountable. We have to be suspicious of anyone who requires absolute loyalty and isolation from our families. Also, it teaches us the importance, most of all, of accountability, not just for individuals, but for institutions, because we have to make sure that this does not happen again. We have to hold all of these institutions accountable and ensure that our history is never forgotten or repeated. So the lesson for the community is for us to speak out. Don't wait for someone else to do it for you. And when someone requires so much of you to prove that you are their friend or their follower or their believer or whatever, that's too much. Nobody should have that type of power or control over individuals.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everyone. I want to thank Captain Williams for giving her lived experience. And I want to put it in a broader, spiritual, historical, and social context. He was a manifestation of a counterfeit, bigoted expression of Christianity. When you talk about can it happen again, it's happening right now.
Amen. Amen.
How is it happening? The ghost of Billy Graham is alive. How so, Amos Brown? 40 years ago, he went down to Australia with one of his so-called crusades. And there was a man named Rupert Murdoch who supposedly got religion, whatever that meant. And in the Billy Graham Association, if you come to Jesus, and whatever that meant, you are next assigned to a local pastor. When Rupert Murdoch migrated to this country, who was he assigned to? Rick Warren. Where was Rick Warren? Down there at Saddleback Church in Southern California. And immediately when he got into this country and got situated, he bought up Fox News, the New York Post, Wall Street Journal. 80% of these right-wing, extreme, conspiracy theory sprouting talk shows. And even he came into the black church of all places through the back door with that old little book, Purpose-Driven Life. Purpose-Driven Life, written by Rick Warren. And you look at that little old book and you see who's the publisher of it. Zondervan and Son. Who owns Zondervan and Son? Rupert Murdoch. Who's been over there in Uganda with that homophobic, extreme, unloving, unkind theology? So much so, when it was dumped on Uganda and those black Ugandans went to the extreme and took him at his word about gays being evil. And you know what the Ugandan parliament got ready to do? To establish a measure for capital punishment for anybody who was caught who was gay. If you don't believe me, check it out. Thank God for the good use of, what you call it, AI. Google it. What Amos Brown is telling you is true. It can happen again as it is now happening.
That's right.
What is that man, that moron that is in the White House?
Orange man.
What happened? He started selling Bibles.
Mm.
He went over to St. John's Church for a photo op and even had the Bible turned upside down. And what is his in good, bad crime, bad trouble? What's that lady's name? What's that lady's name? That preacher laid hands on him. Right. And she was around Easter time this past year talking about selling the 7 blessings for $1,000. I know I've been long winded, but I'm just being plain with you. I'm telling you something. It can happen again. This nationalism, don't you believe it? Run away from it. Jesus was no nationalist. He was for the world. And this nonsense that America is pushing now, it is crooked, fraudulent spirituality. And that's what Jim Jones came also and dumped on this black community in San Francisco. And why did we come? Why did he get a foothold here? He tried to get established down in Los Angeles, but there were too many blacks down there, Ace. He tried to go up there to Seattle, but Seattle had Sam McKinney there and one of the most successful OIC programs in America. He couldn't get established there, but he came to San Francisco around the time that the Fillmore was bombed out, pushed out by public policy, so-called redevelopment agency that started in 1948. So take it home, take it to the bank. It can happen again if we don't use our heads for more than a hat rack and not get caught up with anybody who comes along and tells you to bow and worship him. That was Jim Jones.
There, a brief one, because we got other people.
Arrogant, so heavenly minded, that's no earthly good. Spirituality. Run away from it. Have nothing to do with it. Jesus was about others, was about love, was about forgiveness, mercy, and justice. But anybody who comes telling you to fall down and worship him. And the other thing our captain touched on, my mama always told me down in Mississippi, don't you ever get comfortable around somebody who can't look you in the eye.
Okay. So we're gonna,
Yeah.
Always had those shades on.
That's right. That's right.
Wow. Good evening, retired Captain Williams. I had to come behind Dr. Amos Brown. That's something else to have to speak. I have a question, but before I have a question, and I know that I may be out of order, but with the fire and the historical knowledge that you have, the NAACP still needs you. Dr. retired Captain Williams. I'm asking this question because you shared that I am your niece. I was born in September 1978, so I don't really have a direct recollection, but I always, growing up in our house, my grandmother was really afraid to talk about her time with People's Temple or with Jim Jones She was always really scared. She kept a bookcase with like some 8-track tapes and some books that she would never let us read. She would tell us that one day she would let us, but that day never came. She never actually believed that he was gone. I remember being around 10 and 11, and we used to catch the Muni, and she would always be concerned that he would be somewhere. She never thought that he actually died in Guyana. But I just wanted you to share because my grandmother told me bits and pieces, but I want you to fill in the blanks on how you made it back. Tell us how you made it back.
That's a good question. You know what? You stole my little thunder because it was something I was going to say just before that, if you'll let me just have that for a minute. Now that I look back on what happened here in San Francisco, I look at it as a deliberate 12-step pattern of oppression. First of all, as Black people, we have the legacy of slavery. And whether we want to believe it or not, we are still slaves, but we carry invisible chains. You can't actually see those chains, but they are there. The second thing was the assassination of Malcolm X, Dr. Martin Luther King, and many of our other great leaders. Eldridge Cleaver, the list goes on and on. Then the third thing was the Nixon era war on drugs. It wasn't a war on drugs, it was a war on Black people. And then after that, the CIA collusions with drug traffickers targeting Black communities. You know, we didn't know how to make any drugs. We didn't know how to manufacture drugs. Come on now. Then 6 is the fall of the Black churches. That was deliberate because they knew the Black churches were our anchor. That was where we gained knowledge and power, and we felt strength because we had a faith that could carry us through. 7 was the rise and influence of figures like Jim Jones. There was Sun Moon. There were all kinds of people that were out there, the Hare Krishnas, all that stuff. 8, gentrification and displacement of our Black community and our people. That was deliberate. Then 9 was the Jonestown massacre. 10, the crack epidemic. Crack was meant to exploit our people, and it did. It did. And we still can't recover from the damage it has done. And then 11, homelessness, a generation of the unhoused. And then 12, the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 to marginalized groups. How long are we going to stand by and allow this planned attack on our people to continue? That's the question that I'm going to leave you all with, but I'm going to answer the question that my niece has placed in front of me, which is, how did we manage to get back? As I stated, Jim Jones was hopelessly addicted to drugs. In Jonestown, I got to see it firsthand. Nobody had to tell me. I saw it and witnessed it for myself. As people were coming in from the United States, they were bringing their medications with them. They were told, you don't need your medication because you're being healed. You're healed because now you're here in the promised land with Father Jim Jones. So we're going to take your medicines from you. Placed in his full time. It was outlandish. I could not believe it. But at that moment, the city girl came out in me. And I said, I am not going to stay here. I can't. I'd rather die fighting to get out of here than to stay here. I can't be. I need to get back to my family. So I found a little Guyanese woman that had a telephone in her house. Yeah, I did remember as a child what you look up and which ones were the telephone poles, and I followed that line to a particular home. I had some U.S. dollars on me because Jim Jones entrusted me to do all the procurement because I had the gift to gab. So I could bargain a deal. And so what I did was when I would bargain these deals for different meals, I would pocket some of the money. I didn't consider it stealing. Okay, it probably was, but it was for a good cause. So I would pocket some of that money. And I did that continuously for a week. And then finally, I remembered him telling us that there's always somebody watching you. We got people who are watching for the Americans that are coming around in the town. And I said, well, I'm just going to have to take a chance. So I went up to this Guyanese woman's home and I knocked on the door. And I said, excuse me, I'm a American and I want to know, do you have a phone? And she said, yes. I said, can I use your phone? I'll pay you to use your phone. I just need to make a collect call back to the United States. Now, when I was there, $1 US, I think, was worth probably $3 Guyanese dollars. So, shoots, I was rich. I had it going on. So, I paid her to let me use her phone. And it was at that moment, there were numbers that I remembered. I remembered your number too, Lisa. That's someone that I grew up with. But there were numbers I remembered, and I called those numbers. And I started to report to my family what I was seeing firsthand going on there. We were not being fed properly. We were being malnourished. We never saw meat. We never saw milk. We never saw eggs. We didn't have any of that. We were living on rice pudding diet. I started eating coconuts. I thought I could start a coconut diet. I didn't realize coconuts were fattening. God, I came back a fat girl. But anyway, and so I continued to do that. And I'd use this Guyanese woman's phone probably at least 10 or 12 times to let my family know which reporters to get back in touch with here in the United States, which of course was the Chronicle, the Examiner, and some of the major news reporters on the networks. And so my family started to do the work that was necessary. And one day, Jim Jones came up to me and he said, we were in a meeting, a planning commission meeting, and he was trying to get us to decide whether we thought he should go back and face his charges. Well, when he said he was thinking about going back to the United States to face his charges, I was like, yeah, let's get this sucker back to the United States, let them arrest him, then we can all get the heck up out of here. So I said, yes, I think you should. You should be an example for everyone. I think you should go back and answer these charges. So he and his sons were going to come back to the United States, supposedly to face the charges, but they were going to make a stop in Miami, where my mom and dad were, because that's where they had been placed to greet folks who were going to be migrating on to Guyana. So I got the brilliant idea that I should try and write my mother a letter. So he said, you know, you haven't talked to your mother, Yulanda, for a long time. I said, yeah, I know. He says, well, when I'm going back to the United States, why don't you write her a letter? I said, okay, I'll do that. And I just brushed it off and I went on in my room. And I did have some paper and a pen and I started writing. Boy, did I write her a letter. I was telling her everything that was going on and who was doing what and everything. And I told her, if you come over here, I said, I need you to come over here to get me. Bring some U.S. dollars. Don't give them your passport. Don't tell them you have any money. When they ask you for money, you don't have any money. Get an airline ticket for me and my daughter. and Ron. So she said, So at that point, I thought about it and I put the letter in an envelope and I sealed it and I put my mom's name on the front of it. I looked at Jim Jones' sons. There was Tim, Stephen, Jimmy. And I had to decide which one did I think I could trust. Well, something told me go with Jimmy because you could make him feel maybe guilty a little bit and he'll just do it. So I pulled Jimmy to the side and I said, Jimmy, you going with your daddy to Guyana, right? He said, to United States, right? He said, yeah. I said, can you do me a favor? He said, what's that? I said, I need to get this letter to my mother. It's a real personal letter. You shouldn't be reading it. Little boy shouldn't be reading these kind of letters. But can you get this to my mother? Don't give it to anybody but my mother. Can you promise me that? You know that you and I have always been good friends. You've come to our house, eating all this stuff. Come on, Jimmy. Can you do this for me? And he goes, yeah. I'll do it. So he took the letter. And I said, now, when you get to the airport, when my mom meets you, give her that letter. Don't give it to anybody else. Okay, I won't. Okay, 2 days had lapsed, and I was on pins and needles trying to figure out if he had gotten that letter or what happened, because we hadn't heard anything. All of a sudden, a car pulls up, and here comes Jim Jones, Jimmy, and all of them. I said, uh-oh. They found out that I got a letter to Mama. That wasn't what had happened. What had happened was he became a coward and realized he didn't really want to go back to San Francisco. So he got back on the next plane and went back to Guyana. However, as God would have it, Jimmy gave the letter to my mother. And my mother was smart enough, and she told me she did this. She put it right in her breast area. And then Jim looked at Jimmy and said, did you read that letter? Did you have that letter read? And he goes, yeah, I read it. It's okay? Yeah. And he looked at my mother. My mother did like this, like, yeah, come and try and get this one. This will be the last. And so she said that's how she was able to read what I had written to her. And she came within another 4 to 5 days. A yellow cab pulled up, and a little guy, man, came out of the cab and said, is this? I was just so frustrated. I said, yeah, he's looking for her. And when I realized that was my mother, I left my baby, Naoki, I left her up on the veranda, and I went charging down the steps. I don't think my feet hit any step, but I went down there and rushed to her arms. And the only thing I could say to her is, you don't have any money? Don't give him your passport. And I kept rambling on. My mother said, I heard you. And I just kept saying it because I knew if she had Trump, very similar. Charismatic leaders. They want ultimate control. They want you to prove your loyalty. They tell you how they're going to make everything great. Yes, Jim Jones' environment was different because it was more of a closed environment because it was in a church cult setting. Intentional. Of course, Trump's is a much larger audience. It's the general public. However, he uses the media to his advantage, and he uses his money to his advantage. Both of them feel that they are authoritarians. They are unquestioned leaders. They command significant power. They have a hierarchy that exists. Their leadership is that of loyalty and discipline and a power structure. Because you know if you do something that's contrary to what Orange Man told you to do, you're going to suffer some severe consequences. And both Jim Jones and Donald Trump exhibit behavior that is a narcissistic trait. And they have a sense of entitlement, and they want to be admired at all times. Jim Jones wanted to feel that he was the Messiah. And whereas Donald Trump wants to feel like his achievements, he should be the king of the United States until he dies. And if he had a way to change that Constitution to do so, that is ultimately what he would do, believing that he was keeping America great. And it's always us versus them. And who's the them? Right now, the them is the Hispanic culture. But the danger is the them will eventually become Black people. The them will become everything that has aligned or at some point in time engaged with us. Because ultimately, his America does not include people that look like us, nor does it include people who think like us. And that's the unfortunate dangers of the world.
Yeah. So.
This is very important. The reason why I knew so much about the evils of Jim Jones, because I took a course at Morehouse on the Reverend Dr. Lucius Miles Tobin entitled Christian Faith and Cultural Crisis. I hit the ground in 19. He had never had breakfast with me, or lunch, or dinner, to see who I was. But he tried to, as a new fellow on the block. So we have to always be aware of the fact that good learning and
college, I went to Morehouse College, and the first thing when I stepped off the bus on Morehouse College, the first voice I heard was a good Dr. Reverend Amos Brown telling me what I needed to do and where I needed to go. It was the first voice I heard. Never forget that voice. So thank you, Reverend Brown. Thank you all for being here. And have a good rest of the evening.